If I tell you right now that reading is good, as you probably have heard from years of growing up, from your parents or your teachers, would you agree with me? Most likely, right? Most of us know that reading is good for us. Why it is that we aren't always carrying around a book with us, like we would to something that's supposed to be good for us. I'm really not here to criticize you to doing so. I myself think that not everybody had to do that to prove your love of reading. Let me tell you about my experience with reading. Growing up, I've always loved it. I used to read magazines, fairy tales, comic books back when I was a kid. Back in secondary school, I would read novels and science books. Then came the peak of my so-called reading career in grade 7, where I was doubling up in the quantity of books I was reading, and at the same time, I became extremely selective with what I read. Actually, to tell you the truth, being selective of what I read is just a fancy way to cover up the real thing that happened back then, which is me wasting a lot of time questioning whether or not should I pick up a book. Let me just describe to you exactly what was happening back then. I stood in front of a stack of books like this, and I would think, well, if I read this book, is that gonna help me to solve my homework? No? Then I'm not gonna read it. And I call that being selective because I thought that was good. But eventually, I realized that I was not being productive at all. And I started asking myself why. Because I was doing something that was supposed to be good, that was being selective. But then I ended up wasting time instead of actually getting any reading done. So after years of observing and reflecting on what I did back on, I have come to notice something in teenagers that I would like to call the skepticism in the power of reading. What is skepticism in the power of reading to me? I would like to define my definition of skepticism in reading as having doubts in the process of reading or think, thinking of reading as a means to solve an immediate problem. So, for this type of skepticism of reading or over practical approach to reading, I classify these people into two types. The first type are the people who never really give reading a chance because they cannot possibly think how reading can help them in any way. The second type of people are those who have actually had fierce beliefs in the power of books, but after not seeing themselves getting instant results, they give up, and their belief is shattered into strong disbelief. For both of these types, there are some mindset shifts that they are going to make in order to break free from these limiting beliefs about books. Now, let us start it with the first type, the over-practical. These people are those who spend time sitting to convince themselves that reading cannot possibly help them get better in any way. They cannot see how reading this book is going to make their lives immediately better. For example, if I'm having this really difficult homework and reading this book is not gonna help, then I'm not gonna do it. That is the mindset of people in type 1. Now, if you ask these people if they think reading is good, they're really likely to say yes, they do think that reading is good, but easier said than done. They only look at the short term benefits of reading, which is how it's going to benefit them today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, to which they do not see any possibility of what they read changing anything. Don't get me wrong though, these people are not lazy. They may be someone who is extremely result oriented and particular with what they spend their time on. However, if they think of reading as a means of to solve an immediate problem or simply consider it as a temporary motivation. They start questioning the process of reading if it doesn't actually help them, for example, to solve their homework. I have been in this position, to be honest with you, and while you may think that why is it so hard to convince the people, maybe just give reading a chance, it's really not that easy. Let me just play out how a conversation with this type of person would go. You would tell them, why is it so hard to try reading and see if it's worked for you? Then, with their super logic, would say, would you study literature to get better at math? Obviously, you're not gonna study literature to get better at math, right? And with that logic, if it doesn't help me to solve my homework, if it doesn't help me get better at school immediately, why should I waste hours on it? So now moving on to the next type, which is the disbelievers. These people are interesting as they used to have strong beliefs in books. They used to be the one like me standing here right now telling you that reading is good. But the thing is, after reading several times and not seeing themselves turning into geniuses overnight, they give up. They lose the motivation. So for this type of people, the problem really isn't with their expectations for the results, because as leaders, we should always expect an outcome to come out of everything that we do. The problem is with their degree of expectations that is set for their results. When you read something and you expect the results to come overnight and the reality doesn't turn out that way, it can be extremely discouraging and even frustrating. Therefore, no matter how strong your initial belief in books were, you eventually just stop believing in them, and then you're refused by what you consider a package of waste of time and energy, along with a complimentary gift of disappointment ever again. And that's how we arrive at the second type of people. Now, for both types, there are some realizations that they are going to have to make in order to break themselves free from these limiting beliefs. The problem with type 1 is that they limit themselves to only what they think can help them. For example, if I'm reading this book, I need to know exactly how it's going to benefit me, and I need to see that scenario. But really, among the many things that we can predict, what happens to us, failures, and especially opportunities is not one of them. You should not be overly worried about how what you read today will benefit you tomorrow, and be overly attached to how exactly that will play out, because we don't know. I know that right now you have the energy, the time, the curiosity to learn. I don't know if that also holds true for the future. Back when I was having this problem as well, there was this story that really inspired me to maybe step out of my comfort zone to test this theory out. It's a story about Steve Jobs I came across. So we know who Steve Jobs, right? Hello, iPhone users. He's the CEO and the founder of Apple. He's the one of the geniuses that we know. We know that he runs Apple, so basically, he does what has to do with information technology and business. We would expect a person like this to start with knowledge from business books and books on IT. But back in university, he took a calligraphy class just for fun. Calligraphy is basically, to put it simply, the art of writing fancy letters that you can see in cards and birthday cards. You know what I'm talking about? He took it just for fun. And personally, for me, I would never imagine that calligraphy would help with someone who is doing business and information technology. And maybe he didn't know how that would help either. But eventually, his knowledge on calligraphy, the knowledge that he took from that calligraphy class, came into use when he was designing the interface for the MacBook. This story really inspired me to try out and stop doubting so much of whether or not I'm learning now will come into use in the future. And now, I've come to learn that every single piece of knowledge that you're taking in will come back to help you at one point in your life, especially when you least expect it. That is why you should stop doubting yourself about whether or not you should learn something.